It is a genuine and profound honor to be standing here, sharing this space with all of you today. You know, I've reflected on this a lot, and I truly believe my personal story can resonate deeply with a great number of you in this room. Primarily because I get labeled as a lot of different things by a lot of different people, as I'm sure you can easily imagine. But the one specific moniker I sincerely wish people would use more frequently to describe me, which also happens to be the most accurate reflection of my life's work, is that of an entrepreneur. At my very core, that is what I do. I am a builder. I build things from the ground up. I build large, complex organizations designed to last. We collectively help to build powerful cultural movements, and we meticulously build persuasive messaging frameworks from scratch. And this entire journey, this calling to build, started back in my formative years in the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where I nurtured a single, all-consuming ambition. I was determined to go to West Point. My entire identity was wrapped up in gaining admission to the United States Military Academy. It was the absolute pinnacle of my aspirations. I became an Eagle Scout. I captained the football and basketball teams. I immersed myself completely in my local community, all with that singular goal in mind. So it was a devastating blow when I ultimately did not get accepted. In the aftermath of that disappointment, I managed to convince my somewhat skeptical parents to let me pause before immediately jumping into college. I proposed taking a single gap year, arguing that I needed time to figure out my next steps. But my private idea was far more ambitious. I wanted to try and start a meaningful organization completely from nothing, with the mission of reaching the next generation of young Americans to teach them about the fundamental first principles of liberty and individual freedom, and to convince them that our country, despite its flaws, is an inherently great nation truly worthy of being preserved and protected. Well, as life often has it, that one carefully planned gap year unexpectedly turned into what has now become a 13-year gap year. This all began back in 2012, right there in Chicago. So the fundamental process, the engine behind all of this, is actually quite straightforward when you break it down. Look, genuine entrepreneurs are, at their heart, problem solvers. It really is that simple. People approach me all the time and ask, "Charlie, what's the real secret? How does someone actually get rich? How do you achieve tangible success?" My answer is always the same. You identify a meaningful problem and you solve it effectively. Once you provide a solution to a real problem, people will naturally exchange value for it. And then, crucially, if you continue to solve that same problem better, more efficiently, or more innovatively than anyone else over a sustained period, you have now created a powerful market differentiator for yourself. Well, I identified a very significant problem that I believed was crippling our nation, which was that the youth of our country were being dramatically pulled to the far left ideologically, and that our once great college campuses had largely ceased to be bastions of free speech, open dialogue, and intellectual inquiry. And so I made a decisive choice to start an organization specifically designed to address that exact problem head-on. I named it Turning Point USA. I literally started it with nothing but an idea in my parents' garage. I had no seed money, zero influential connections, and frankly no real clue what I was actually doing from a business standpoint. And I have to say thanks entirely to the Lord's divine providence, and I must give all credit to God Almighty for His unwavering blessings at every single corner. At every challenging step and at every uncertain turn in the road, we have experienced the most extraordinary and humbling journey over these past 13 years. It's been a journey where I have been privileged not just to make a tangible impact in the cultural and political arena, but to actually build an institution of real value, of great substance, and of remarkable depth. As you kindly mentioned earlier, we now have over 1,000 dedicated employees across the Turning Point ecosystem. We generate well over $150 million in annual revenue between all of our different affiliated entities. Most importantly, we have a grassroots army of over 430,000 passionate Americans who donate their hard-earned money to Turning Point USA and Turning Point Action regularly. You could rightly call them our investors, our customers. But since we are primarily a nonprofit, though we do have a for-profit arm that includes my television show, our true customers, the people we are ultimately serving, are actually the students themselves. They are the primary target we are trying to reach, educate, and empower every single day. And so, when I look back on it all, it has just been an amazing, undeserved blessing. And as a serial entrepreneur, my mind is always racing, always looking at the horizon for new, pressing problems to try and solve, and for new, innovative ways that we can bring a fresh, passionate, and disruptive approach to the mission of making America a better, stronger, and more free country for everyone. I want to be clear about something. I personally do not believe that being materially wealthy is the most important thing in life. It's a question of priority. Do you want to be wealthy of the soul, rich in relationships and purpose, or do you just want to have a giant pile of money? Now, if you do want to be rich in the financial sense, I can actually tell you how to do it. Contrary to popular belief, it's not some mystical, impossible secret. The formula is straightforward. Work relentlessly, harder than you think is possible, and dedicate yourself to solving a significant problem for a large number of people. You have to dedicate your entire life to this pursuit. But here's the catch I've observed. Most people I meet who claim they want to be rich, they actually don't. What they really want is to have the lifestyle of being rich, the comfort, the status, the freedom. They don't actually want the grueling, often lonely work of becoming rich. If your whole reason for getting out of bed every morning is singularly focused on becoming wealthy, you will almost certainly become rich. I firmly believe that if the acquisition of material wealth is your highest priority, there is actually a very clear, time-tested playbook for that. If you want the so-called secret to getting rich, it's actually not super complex. It looks like this. Live consistently below your means, save and invest your money wisely in high-quality companies, and then constantly seek out and execute on good ideas. And you must read a lot, voraciously. If you just commit to reading a lot across a wide range of subjects, you will suddenly start to see emerging trends and patterns that others miss, and you will become exceptionally well-informed. Now, I don't want to make it seem like it's a trivial, easy path. It's not. But the principles are simple. It really depends on what you personally define as rich. But I will say one final thing on this topic. People are often remarkably, astonishingly bad with managing their money. Let me be blunt. If your top priority on a weekend is going out, getting drunk, and socializing, then okay, that's your choice. Go do that. I know a lot of people who tell me, I want to be rich, and then, in the same breath, mention they just spent $700 at the bar last weekend. My response is always, oh, okay, so you don't actually want to be rich. You want to feel good in the moment? You want the temporary euphoria and the social validation, even if it means pumping toxins through your liver. But that choice means you are not actively choosing a life of long-term happiness and deep contentment. And listen, I'm not here to be a moralist. If you want to drink and party, it's a free society. You have every right to make that choice. But then you must also have the personal responsibility not to turn around and complain to me that you're not materially wealthy. The two paths are mutually exclusive. What I have found through experience is that in order for you to truly 10x your life and your outcomes, you also sometimes have to make the difficult decision to delete certain negative or unsupportive people from your inner circle to get you to that next level. If there are people in your life who are constantly telling you, you can't do that, it's impossible, you're dreaming, that is a heavy anchor. Sure, you can theoretically use that negativity as fuel, as a motivator to prove them wrong, but you have to be an exceptionally strong-willed and resilient person to be constantly surrounded by that kind of energy and still manage to succeed. And so, my practical recommendation is this. If they are family members or your parents, you should always honor them. But you don't have to constantly immerse yourself in their limiting beliefs. Instead, you must proactively go out and find people who will act as coaches, as mentors, as cheerleaders, as encouragers for the specific type of person and the kind of innovator you are trying to become. You have to understand, my own imagination was incredibly limited at the beginning. I could not even begin to grasp the basic concept of what it meant to receive and cash a check from a major donor. Understand? Yeah. I was just a recent high school graduate who didn't even know the difference between a credit and a debit card, who barely knew how to open up a basic checking account, and who all of a sudden had the audacity to think he could start a national organization. But what I learned is that in entrepreneurship, there are always steps and there are always sequences. It's a gradual climb. You don't start at the top. Eventual